The Supreme Court might be on the verge of completely undermining our ability to fight climate change and could throw out hundreds of laws that are essential to our everyday lives. It's the culmination of these two right-wing strategies that have been quietly working for decades to get to this moment. And it could all come down to one case, West Virginia v. EPA.
Clean air and clean water, the birthright of every American.
The Supreme Court protects the Constitution.
Oh, we love it.
Let's start with some context. The Clean Air Act was passed in 1963 with unanimous support in the Senate. It was designed to reduce air pollution and prevent the smog outbreaks that were suffocating the country.
Prevent smoke, prevent smog.
The Clean Air Act delegates the power to regulate air pollution to the executive branch. And in 1970, Republican President Richard Nixon set up the Environmental Protection Agency to manage this power and other work to protect human health and the environment. The EPA has used the Clean Air Act to cut emissions by 63% between 1980 and 2015. Our air now has less lead, less carbon monoxide, and less smog than it used to. This work has saved millions of lives. And today, the Clean Air Act is one of our best tools for lowering greenhouse gas pollution and fighting climate change. This work has also been incredibly popular. Protecting clean air and clean water is consistently supported by Americans of every political persuasion. As recently as 1990, even far-right conservatives like Mitch McConnell and Newt Gingrich were voting for strengthening the Clean Air Act. But one group did have a problem with it. The fossil fuel special interests who make their money through polluting.
We mine more coal than any other people.
They've recruited lawmakers, mostly Republicans, to work on their behalf to overturn environmental protections. But even when Republicans have controlled Congress and the presidency, they haven't been able to overcome the popularity of the Clean Air Act. So they turn their attention to the courts.
There is a third branch, the judicial.
But before we go any further, let's talk about the second strategy. In 1982, a small group of right-wing lawyers from the most elite law schools met to form a group you may not have heard of, the Federalist Society. They want what a lot of right-wing advocates want, to weaken the federal government and put more power in the hands of corporations. But the Federalist Society wasn't interested in electing new officials to make it happen. They realized their ideas weren't popular enough to win through the democratic process. They had another plan. Pack America's courts with far-right judges who share their beliefs, and use those judges to advance their agenda. And the first part worked. They've used strategically placed politicians and obscure Senate procedures to block Democratic nominees and confirm their own at an unprecedented pace.
And I came up with a list. The Federalist Society was very much involved.
Today, 5 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court are members of the right-wing Federalist Society. These justices have put forward a lot of complicated-sounding legal justifications for their agenda. But the centerpiece is this theory called NonDelegation.
We've gathered together to talk about non-delegation.
Basically, non-delegation believers want to severely limit the powers Congress can delegate to the executive branch. This is not how our government has ever worked. Congress, for its entire 2.5-century history, has always delegated powers to the executive branch. Non-delegation would paralyze a huge chunk of the executive branch, which is, of course, their whole point. Okay, back to pollution and the case we started on. In 2015, the EPA produced a rule to reduce carbon pollution called the Clean Power Plan. A few years earlier, the Supreme Court had affirmed that this type of regulation was in line with the Clean Air Act. Fossil fuel corporations tried to have their allies in Congress overturn the rule, but came up short. Then,
Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States.
Donald Trump repealed the Clean Power Plan within months.
My administration is putting an end to the war on coal.
And something else happened.
The nomination of Neil M. Gorsuch, Brett M. Kavanaugh,
Amy Coney Barrett
is confirmed.
The Federalist Society finally secured a historic majority on the Supreme Court. This court is led by Chief Justice John Roberts, a Republican appointee who talks a lot about the legitimacy of his court. Roberts has said that the court's role is just to interpret the law, to call balls and strikes, and that party or ideology shouldn't play a role in decisions. But that's not how the Federalist Society thinks. And the fossil fuel interests saw an opportunity.
The Supreme Court is tackling a legal battle that could impact the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions.
The fossil fuel companies decided to challenge the now defunct Clean Power Plan in court in the hopes of preventing the EPA from regulating carbon pollution altogether. They failed to get what they wanted through Congress, so now they're asking the Supreme Court to do it for them by overturning 50 years of precedent. A ruling like that would be a huge roadblock in our ability to combat climate change, and it would go against the will of the majority of voters. But because of their new, undemocratic Supreme Court majority, they can work around both voters and Congress. Right-wing groups aligned with the Federalist Society have been flooding the Supreme Court with briefs, asking them to use this case to go all the way and rule on non-delegation. Simply put, that ruling would be a politicization of the court. It would deliver a pair of victories that right-wing groups have been chasing for decades. And this comes as more Americans than ever before question the Supreme Court's legitimacy. American institutions as we know them, and our ability to fight the climate crisis, are under threat without real reforms to restore balance to the judicial branch.
That roof is coming. Holy!
To learn more and get involved, visit evergreenaction.com/SCOTUS.